This week's Torah portion begins with Ki Teitzei l'melchama al oivecha, when you go out to war against your enemies. And if you know a little bit of Hebrew, you might realize that it says al oivecha, upon your enemies. It doesn't mean against your enemies, it means on, that you're on top of your enemies. And this has a very significant lesson that we can't view opposition to godliness and to our divine service as something that is on par with that divine service. Like these are just two equal enemies fighting at each other. You know, this dualistic idea, there's good and evil, and they're really basically just as powerful, fighting each other, and, you know, hopefully good will win. No, goodness, godliness is far and away just incomparable to anything that covers over godliness. And we have to have this realization that when we are going against evil forces that are trying to dissuade us from serving God properly, really, we have the upper hand. We are al oivecha. We are on top of our enemies. We are the ones that are higher because we are coming with the strength and power of goodness and godliness. And the Haftorah also reflects this idea of going out to war on your enemies, in the sense that primarily it's a comforting Haftorah where, you know, we're again in these weeks between Tisha B'Av and Rosh Hashanah, where we are being comforted after the destruction of the temple. However, there is a portion of the Haftorah where it says you'll broaden the place of your tent, you know, where you have this idea of getting a wide tent. And politically we speak of this. This is perhaps where this concept comes from. And he says you'll expand to the right and to the left, and your descendants will possess nations. So we have this idea of going out and really conquering the world, so to speak, for God in a spiritual sense, right? Because it says that we'll possess nations and populate desolate cities, right? Things that are void of goodness and godliness, we will come in and we'll fill it, and we will make sure that godliness is revealed in this place. And while this has been true to an extent during the exile, it certainly comes to fruition during the Messianic era, where, as we say later in the Haftorah, that even though God forsook us for a brief moment, right, and there was terrible trials and tribulations, that he will certainly have compassion and everlasting kindness with the redemption when Mashiach, the Messiah, comes, and there will be everlasting peace. And he compares this to the waters of Noah, right? That he could have said the waters of the flood. Why does he say the waters of Noah? So first of all, right, just like the waters of Noah will never happen again, he says this worldwide flood will never happen again. So too, these trials and tribulations, you know, after the redemption of the Messianic era, we'll never have any of these difficulties again. But also, it's not called the waters of the flood, it's called the waters of Noah. Now, in a certain sense, this is a contradiction, because the flood was, the waters of the flood was terrible and disruptive and destructive. But the name Noach means tranquility, rest. And so these are two opposite ideas. But the truth is that the floods themselves, the difficulties themselves, what does it represent? Right, the flood is sort of the drowning in our difficulties in the world and making a living and so on, and dealing with the physical aspects of the world. And that actually paves the way for there to be rest, right? It makes full repentance possible. When you have these difficulties, you know, it's if everything's good, then how are you going to grow? Right? When things are difficult, when there's a challenge, when there's a stressor, that's when you shine, right? How do you get the oil out of the olive? You have to press it. And so too, when we're pressed, that's when we really shine. That's when our inner self, our true self, comes about. And so when we go through life and we can observe and really appreciate the divine providence that happens in our lives, and withstanding the ethical challenges that we face in the workplace and elsewhere, and really yearning for that divine closeness, then we can come to Noach. We can come to rest on a higher spiritual ground than we could have achieved otherwise. Shabbat Shalom.